talking about Ruth and Naomi, and this morning, if you weren't here last week, you need to catch up because this week the story is really getting good. Caleb's going to come out and share God's word with us.
Let me offer to you my good morning as well. We're glad that you're here. If you have a Bible today, we're going to be in Ruth chapter 2. You can go ahead and grab your Bible and flip there. Let me just kind of fill you in where we're at. As Todd said, if you weren't here last week, man, we would encourage you to go back and listen to last week's message. We are walking chapter by chapter through the book of Ruth, this 4-week series, 4 chapters. We looked at chapter 1 last week. We're going to look at chapter 2 this week, chapter 3 next week, chapter 4 the week after, right? And so that's where we're headed. We'd love for you to just kind of keep up with us in that. It's a fascinating story. It's an incredible story of the way in which we see the hand and the working of God out in the lives of people. And so it's just an incredible thing for you to get to witness if you haven't done that. So go back and check that out. All right, now, if you weren't here last week, I'm going to catch us up to speed on where we're at, and then we're going to jump in to chapter 2. And let me just say this before we even go anywhere today. My goal for us this morning is that I want us to paint a picture of what is happening in chapter 2. Like if you leave with nothing else other than, man, I just feel like I fully understand chapter 2, that's the goal, right? It's not that you leave with a bunch of points or a bunch of things. I want you to climb inside of this story, because I believe this is that as we climb inside of the story of what is going on here, we see and we experience God in the way that he works, his character, the way that he functions. We understand, we see all that by climbing into the story this morning. So my heart and our goal, what we're going to do is we are literally going to walk verse by verse through this entire chapter this morning. We're going to paint this great picture, and ultimately I think we're going to see a lot about the character of God and the invitation that is extended to us as his people this morning. All right, now, if you weren't here last week, here's ultimately the setting that we find ourselves in as we get to Ruth chapter 2. Chapter 1 starts by introducing us to this family. The husband of this family, his name is Elimelech, and he is married to a woman named Naomi, and they have 2 sons. Now, the setting of this family during the time and the context of it is that they find themselves in the midst of a famine. They live in Bethlehem, which is in Israel, and they find themselves in a famine. There's no food in the land, and so they, as a family, decide, Elimelech and his wife, Naomi, decide we need to get up, we need to leave, and we need to go find food. And so they go to a neighboring nation of Moab. Now, what we know about Moab, we're not going to get into all this week. This will get unpacked for us down the road, but Moab was a nation that Israel kind of was at odds with, and one of the reasons why was because it was kind of known that Moabite women were like seductive of Israelite men. They would come in and they would try to seduce Israelite men, so Israelites there was this bad kind of relationship between the two of them. We're going to get into kind of the history of Moab next week, but ultimately there's not great love between these two nations. So for a family to get up and to leave their homeland in Israel and to go to Moab, it was kind of like, you don't really do that. But all that to say, Elimelech and Naomi, they head into Moab to try to find relief from the famine. And as they enter into Moab, what happens is that they live there. They live there for about 10 years, and they have 2 sons. And these 2 sons, while in Moab, they marry Moabite women, one by the name of Orpah, and one by the name of Ruth. And over the span of these 10 years of living there, this tragedy strikes his family, and ultimately what happens is that Elimelech, the head of the household, he dies, along with the 2 sons. So now what we have is that this family of 6 with these 3 men who are there to provide and take care of this family, all of the men have passed away. They've all died, and what we have left is Naomi as a mother-in-law to 2 Moabite daughter-in-laws. And what happens is that at this time, Naomi hears that, hey, in Bethlehem, the famine is lifted and grain has filled the ground again, and we're able to return back to the home that we once knew. And so Naomi begins to walk back, and with her go Orpah and Ruth. And along the way, she tries to tell Orpah and Ruth, hey, don't come with me. Stay here in Moab. This is your homeland. This is where you're from. You can meet a nice man here. You can be provided for. Your family's here. And Orpah says, you know what? That sounds better. Orpah goes back to Moab, but it says in chapter 1, verse 14, it says this, that Ruth clung to Naomi. It's a word of deep commitment. And she said, no, you know what? I'm not leaving you. I'm going to be with you. I will cling to you. I'll be right by your side. Wherever you go to stay, I'll stay. Whatever you eat, I'll eat. Whatever your God, whoever your God is, will be my God. She abandons her ways that she had known in the past, and she clings to Naomi, and everything that was about to be Naomi's life was about to be Ruth's life as well. And at the end of chapter 1, what we find is brokenness and sadness entering back into Bethlehem as these two widows who have experienced incredible grief and loss are now walking themselves back to Bethlehem, a place that Naomi once knew. And Naomi says these words at the end. She says this, do not call me Naomi any longer. Call me Mara, for the Lord has dealt bitterly with me. For I left, speaking of meaning Bethlehem, I left full and I have returned empty. A place of deep sadness and sorrow and loss and mourning is where we find ourselves at the end of chapter 1. Now, as we enter into chapter 2, as two widowed women who don't have husbands, there's no man in their life, there's needs that are very present. How are they going to survive in Bethlehem? How are they going to function now that they're here, now that they're living there? What are we going to do? How are they going to be able to do this? And so the two needs that we find are these. These are the two needs that they have as they enter back, as we begin chapter 2. The two needs are this. One is they have a need for food, and secondly, they have a need for family. Food and family are very present. How are we going to eat? How are we going to make it day to day? Secondly, who is going to provide for us? Who is going to take care of us? And that's the needs. As we walk into chapter 2, these two things are very, very, very present. They're very much at the front, all right? Now, chapter 2 opens like this. If you have your Bible, you can read along with this. Again, we're going to kind of go verse by verse. It says this, now Naomi had a relative of her husband's, a worthy man of the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. Now, here's what we hear. Verse 1 is we hear, right, there are needs, they're present, and then the author kind of does this thing where he like teases us a little bit. He's like, hey, they need a man. By the way, there just so happened to be a man, and his name was Boaz, and he's from the clan of Elimelech. Now, let me just briefly say there's several things that are happening here that the author is doing as he introduces us to Boaz. What he says is this, he's a worthy man, which means this, that he was a man of great value, he was a man of great wealth and of great knowledge. People knew who Boaz was, and they knew who Boaz was because of his wealth. He owned land, he owned a field. We're going to see that here shortly. All right, those things are present. But also the thing that he has with him is that he's from the clan of Elimelech. And I'm not going to get into all this today, but the way that widows were cared for in that day was that the rights to marry them were passed off to relatives of theirs. So for example, and I know this feels weird, and just you have to understand the culture of the moment. If somebody's husband passed away, what would happen is that the rights to care for them would fall to like the brother. Well, for Ruth, there's no brother. And for Elimelech, there's no brother, right? There's no opportunity to care for them in that way because the brother has also passed away. All right, now what we learn and ultimately what will happen is that then it goes up the line, like it goes up the clan, the family line. Somebody in the family line, the rights gets passed. What the author does is tease us to say, hey, there just so happened to be a man from the clan who had the opportunity to redeem one of these women and offer all the things that they need, and his name is Boaz, and he just so happens to be living in Bethlehem, and then he moves. So he kind of teases us, kind of like shows us him, and then moves away from it. We get to verse 2. Here's what he says in verse 2. Verse 2, it goes like this. And Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain after him in whose sight I shall find favor. And she said to her, go, my daughter. So she set out, and she went, and she gleaned in the field after the reapers. She happened to come to part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the clan of Elimelech. All right, now, at the time that Naomi and Ruth are living in Bethlehem, there was kind of a social justice movement that went on. And ultimately, it was set up long ago by God in Deuteronomy and Leviticus when he set the law that went like this. If you were a landowner, and you had great wealth, what was required of you is that you left the corners of your field unharvested. You didn't do anything to them. You didn't harvest them. You didn't glean them. You left those areas. And those areas were basically set up for the poor and the needy to be able to go and gather grain, and then they could go back to their homes and they could provide a meal. Now, they don't have access to the whole field, but they have corners. So it was almost like this, it was this movement, and I think it's this really, really, really cool picture of the heart of God to care for the poor and the needy. That very early on, in God's establishment of the law, he said this, here's what's going to happen. Those that have a lot, we're going to set up laws that allow them and that ask them to care for those that have very, very, very little. And this is what Ruth and Naomi would understand. So when she says, I'm going to go, she says this, I'm going to go and I'm going to find somebody in whose field I find favor, which means this, is I'm going to go and find somebody who is abiding by these laws, somebody who understands what the law is and they're abiding by it, they're leaving their fields open, and also somebody who would welcome me as a Moabite, a foreigner, to go into their field to gather the grain that's needed to be able to provide so that me and you can have some food. And so she does that. She leaves the home that she was familiar with Naomi, and she goes off, and she, as the scripture says, as it just so happened, she wanders up into this field. It's interesting because what we're going to see starting in this moment moving forward is we're going to see the invisible, providential, sovereign hand of God at work in Ruth's life. And it's funny because as Ruth leaves, she has no idea what God is about to do to her. She has no idea that the field she's about to wander in is going to forever change her life. That the introduction to this man named Boaz is going to forever change her life. She has no idea. But what she does is she just begins moving. Like she begins walking. And I think it's this interesting point for us is that some of us today, maybe even, you're just waiting on God to do something. Maybe you're just like, oh, just speak to me, God. Tell me where to go. And it's interesting. What Ruth does is she just gets up and she just starts moving. And as she starts moving, God begins to move her steps. He begins to put things together to line her up, to send her in the place that he wants her to go, and begins orchestrating this beautiful, beautiful story that would be Ruth's journey for the rest of this book. I think it's this significant thing for us to say this. For some of us today, we're dealing with circumstances similar to Ruth's. We're dealing with sorrow and tragedy, suffering, and we're just like, God, I'm just waiting on you to pull me out of it. And I think maybe one of the invitations God is saying is, hey, I just want you to get up and start moving, and then let me move. My dad wrote a devotional book years ago, and in it, he puts this illustration in it. He says that it's impossible to move a ship that's still, right? You can't move it. With all the force and all the energy and all the things in the world you can do, you can't move a ship that's sitting in a hard road that's not moving. That has no motion to it. But even if that ship is moving 1 mile an hour forward, that ship can be turned. It might take a long time, but even at 1 mile an hour, that ship can eventually be turned. The point is this, is that for a lot of us, I think in life, we just need to get moving like Ruth was. She goes, and then God begins to orchestrate, all right, the steps that would go before her. And of course, she happens to find herself in the field of Boaz. I'll say it like this. There are no accidents in the economy of God. In the presence of God, there are no accidents. We live our life a lot of times. We look at these situations and things that come up, and we read things like, oh, it just so happened that this. Here's the reality. The reality is this, is that there are no accidents in the kingdom of God, in the workings of God. There are only appointments, divine appointments, where God is working out things specifically for his people to experience. All right, and now as we get into verse 4, we're going to see this magnified even more. And here's what happens. And behold, this is more of this, oh, it just so happened. And behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem. Wouldn't you know it, right? So let me just backtrack a little bit, all right? So we got Ruth. She leaves her home. She goes. She tries to find a field. She wanders into this field. She finds favor in this field. She begins to glean in this field, and this field happens to be Boaz's, who is a worthy man, has a lot of money, able to protect, able to provide, but he's also from the clan of Elimelech, which means he can redeem her. And it just so happens that as she wanders into all the fields she could have wandered into, she lands in Boaz's field. And he wasn't there at the time, but wouldn't you know it, that at that time he wanders back to the field, all right? So came, and behold, Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." An incredible picture of his heart. The first words he says in the entire book are, "The Lord be with you." Shows his character, shows his demeanor towards the Lord, and they answered him, "The Lord bless you." And then Boaz said to his young man who was in charge of the reapers, "Hey, whose young woman is this?" Right? Essentially, like he notices, "Hey, something's different about my field today. I'm not exactly sure, but there's a really cute girl over here working in the field. Who is this? Whose is she? Who does she belong to?" It's interesting the question he asks. He doesn't say, "Who is this?" He asks, "Whose?" Right? Like, who does she belong to? It's not just like, who is this random girl? It's like, who does she belong to? Essentially, is she taken? Is she available? I'm trying to get some information, maybe get some digits, right? All these kind of things. This is what he's doing. Who does she belong to? Whose young woman is this? And the servant who is in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the young Moabite woman who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab. And she came to the foreman of the field, 'Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves after the reapers.' And so she came, and she has continued from early morning until now, except for a short rest." Right? So the foreman of the field is essentially, he's encouraged. He's a little bit like, he's taken back by the way that she's worked, right? He notices her. Obviously, there's been some recognition of her. Boaz obviously recognizes her. Who's this cutie over here, right? And we kind of see this interaction, this introduction beginning to happen. It's like this, right? If you ever, like guys, you would maybe feel me on this, and women, listen, you're not, this is you, okay? I'm just gonna tell you, because I've been married to a woman who's like this for 10 years. So here is ultimately you ever like watch like a romance movie, like a rom-com or something, and what happens is as you're watching the movie, like all these things happen, and you're like, this is bogus. This doesn't happen in life, and your wife is like in the chair next to you crying, and you're like, what is going on, right? Like here's the situation, right? So little girl, this is gonna happen in the Hallmark Christmas movies. I'll just go ahead and tell you, this is what happened. Little girl from small town in Connecticut is gonna go off to New York, get the bigwig job. She's gonna come home for Christmas. Mom's gonna say, "Hey, can you go down the street to the bakery and grab some chocolate chip cookies for the big dinner party we're having tonight?" She says, "Sure." And so she wanders out, and what do you know? She just happens, of all the places to go, all the bakeries in town, she wanders into the bakery where the guy is standing there. And as we're watching this, we're like, get out. And my wife is sitting here next to me crying. In fact, I want to show you, this is a video that I captured one time watching my wife watch one of these scenes. This is it, all right, watch. Just watch the smile, it just grows. Look at her. And then she realizes she's caught. Right, here he goes. She's like, "Stop, quit," right? So look, this is all of you women, this is what you do. You watch these and like, that's what happens. And all of us guys are like, this is absolutely ridiculous. This is bogus, man. These things don't happen. And I joke to say it like this, because I need to set us straight on this. This does happen. And here's how this happens. This happens under the hand of a providential, sovereign God who orchestrates every little detail of our lives. Now, you might not see it now playing out for you in your future, but I can just guarantee you this, is that if you were to look back at the last 10 years of your life at all the ways in which God worked, you would sit back, you would probably get back and be like, "Man, get out. There's no way that that's what God did, as he wound all of my steps and put me in this place to experience him in these ways," right? It does work. And the reason it works is because God, as a providential, sovereign God, orchestrating and appointing these things to happen, this is the way that he works. And this is the way that he is working in your life currently, but it is also the way in which he is working in Ruth's life as he navigates and he brings her into this moment where she enters into the field of Boaz. And as I said earlier, her life would be forever changed. So Boaz gets all the information. He gets the lowdown on Ruth. He sees her, he's drawn to her, and then he says, "All right, I got to go talk to her." Guys, you know how this goes, right? The nervous first, "Hey, how are you?" So he goes in verse 8 and 9. Here's what it says. "Then Boaz said to Ruth, 'Now listen, my daughter, do not go to glean in any other field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women, and let your eyes be on the field that they are reaping, and go after them. Have I not charged the young men not to touch you? And when you are thirsty, go to the vessels and drink what the young men have drawn.'" Boaz comes to Ruth and he tells her this: "Hey, you are welcome in this field. And not only are you welcomed here, don't go to any other field. Because here's the things that I've done for you. Here's the things that I want you to do. I don't want you to only glean in these areas. I want you to come into the field. I want you to be brought into the family, into the fold, into where all of my workers are. I want you to come in and you can glean upon the entire field. And what you're going to happen in this is I want you to stay close to these women. Here's what's interesting. I don't know how your Bible translates it, but at the beginning of verse 8 or middle of verse 8, it says this: don't go to another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. I don't know what your Bible says that phrase, keep close, but here's what's interesting. What Boaz in his first sentence that he says to Ruth is he reciprocates what Ruth says to Naomi in chapter 1. In chapter 1, Ruth goes to Naomi and she says, I will, it's not stay close, right? It says, I will cling to you. It says that Ruth clung to Naomi. It is that word of incredibly deep covenant. We don't have a word to describe it in the English language, but it's that deep. And what Boaz tells Ruth to do in this moment is he says this: hey, in this field, I want you to cling. That same word is used. I want you to cling to these women. I want you to find community. I want you to find, what you need in the relationship with these women. And ultimately what he's saying is this: I want you to cling to this field. You follow after these women, you stay close with them, you glean where they glean, you harvest what they harvest, you bring it in. This is what you're going to do. And this is what you're going to find. What I want to do is I want to set up for us this morning 3 pictures of redemption that we get in chapter 2 through this interaction with Boaz. And here's what it is. It is simply this: is that Ruth finds community in Boaz's field. He says this: I want you to come and I want you to be a part of the lives of these women. I want you to come and get to know them. I want you to come and be around them. I want you to find some other females here. You as a foreigner, as an outcast, as somebody who doesn't know anybody here, you come, you cling to these women. You experience life with these women, right? You learn, you find companionship, you find community with these women. And I'll just say it like this: in the field of God, this is what we find. We find community. We find companionship. Secondly, what Ruth finds in Boaz's field is she finds protection in Boaz's field. He looks at his men, and he looks at Ruth and he says, hey, have I not charged the men not to touch you? They will not lay harm on you. As a foreigner, right? As somebody who's another woman in a field with a bunch of men and workers, I have strictly told them not to lay a finger on you. And what Boaz offers to Ruth in this moment is that here in this field, you are safe and you are protected. And that is something that would have been foreign, would have been something that she would have not expected to experience as a Moabite working in a field full of Israelite men and women. And the third thing that we see that she finds in Boaz's field is this: is that she finds refreshment. He says, hey, the water that my young men have drawn, you, my daughter, have access to it anytime you want. You're thirsty, you go get a drink. You need something, you need refreshment, you have access to this as much as you want. Verse 10 says this: and then she fell on her face, bowing to the ground. And she said to him, why have I found favor in your eyes? Why is it that you would take notice of me since I am a foreigner? We just see Ruth respond to Boaz's generosity with incredible humility and sacrifice. Not pride, not proud, not with no prideful spirit. We just see this willingness to essentially say, why? Humbly, why? We see this incredible picture, I think, of Jesus even in the way in which she responds with great humility. Then it sets up for us what I think is this incredible moment, this conversation that begins, and really this exchange that begins over these next several verses, where Boaz responds, and he's essentially this. He says this is the answer to why. He says this in verse 11 through 13. But Boaz answered, all that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told to me, and how you left your father and your mother and your native land, and you came to a people that you did not know before. That alone right there is striking. It is an incredible picture of Ruth's heart, is that she was willing to do all these things, sacrificing all of this in order to go and to follow Naomi. Then Boaz says this: the Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given to you by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. And then she says this: I have found favor in your eyes, my Lord, for you have comforted me, and you have spoken kindly to your servant, though I am not one of your servants. And the conversation ends. And I think it's interesting that it's almost like this, like Ruth's humility leaves Boaz speechless. He just can't believe that a woman who has gone through the things that she's gone through is still this humble in response. She doesn't act like, I've gone through all this stuff, and so give me. No, she just says, thank you. Thank you that you have seen me. Thank you that you're willing to have favor on me despite all the things that have gone on in my life. Thank you that this is who you are. Language is so humble, right, in this moment that I think essentially it leaves Boaz speechless. He doesn't even know what to say. And so the conversation essentially ends there. All right, then we get to verse 14. Some time has passed. Essentially, maybe she went back out in the field. Or verse 14 says this, and I love, this is the first date. You ready? First date, Boaz and Ruth. Here we go. Verse 14. At mealtime, Boaz said to her, well, come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine. So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain, and she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. All right? So listen, here, girl's hungry. Obviously, she's been in the field all day. Boaz notices, and he says this, hey, girl, come eat at my table. Come sit with me. You can come sit with amongst all of us, the reapers, all the other. Come have a meal with me. And they don't just eat leftover bread, old bread, raggedy bread. No, they eat roasted grain, probably freshly harvested. It's like if you go fish, all of you who fish, and maybe you eat the live, like you eat what you catch like that day. It's just super fresh. This is it, right? They've roasted grain, right? And they've come back, and here's ultimately, it's their roasted grain. And not only that, but it's roasted grain, and it's dipped in this, he says, come and take it and dip it in this wine and eat it. And how good it is. Y'all ever been to like one of these Italian restaurants where you walk in and, you walk in, you go to an Italian restaurant, you got to eat pasta, but like, you got to eat the bread, right? I mean, you walk into one of these places, you eat the bread. What they'll bring you a lot of times is they'll bring you like a big loaf of bread, and then they'll come and they'll be like, you want some of the oil? And you're like, yeah, I want some of that. And so they put that oil with the pepper and the salt and whatever else they put in it to make it so good. And then literally it's like, it doesn't matter what you ordered because that's all you want, right? The bread is so good. And you take that bread and you dip it, and all you want is just to take home the bread. Like, leave the pasta, give me the bread. This is what they're doing, right? This is the scene. They're at, Olive Garden, Macaroni Grill. They're having this beautiful bread and olive oil dinner. He says, come dip it in the oil, enjoy it. She eats until she is fully satisfied, and she gets a to-go box, right? She had some left over. Verse 15, when she rose to go glean, Boaz instructed his young men, saying, let her glean even among the sheaves. He says, hey, there is no restrictions to what she is able to glean. You let her go and glean anything she wants. And you do not reproach her. You do not tell her she's wrong. You do not correct her. You let her go. And essentially, you let her have her way, and whatever she wants to glean and however she wants to do it, she has access to it all. And also, pull out some of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. I love this part, right? It's almost like Boaz is like telling his men, listen, she can go, she can do anything she wants, she can glean anything she wants, and also, just to make it easier for her, maybe because it's late, maybe because it's nighttime, maybe he just wants to, I don't want to say show off, but he wants to make it easy. He likes this. He's intrigued by her. So what he says is this, hey, go and pull some out and lay it for her and make it easy for her. It is this incredible sign of his willingness and his desire to care for Ruth in this moment. And it says, verse 17, so she gleaned in the field until evening, and she beat out what she had gleaned, and it was about an ephah of barley. You're like, what's an ephah? All right, an ephah is half a bushel. That help you? No. Okay. You don't know what a half a bushel is. An ephah is essentially this. 30 to 50 pounds worth of grain is what she beat out down at the threshing floor, and she was able to put in a bag and literally take that with her. 30 to 50 pounds. And you're like, was that a lot? Here's the comparison. In that day and time, his reapers, Boaz's workers that worked in his field, would have left each day with essentially 1 to 2 pounds of grain. She left with 30 times that much. All right, if you wanna understand what she did, I mean, this for me, and I'll say this, one of the things we see in the character of God displayed in the heart and the life of Boaz is that he leaves her not with just a little bit, he gives her an abundance to go home with, which I think paints the picture of this. Our God is not a God of just enough. We have a God who is overwhelming in his giving of his gifts. He is a God of abundance. He is not a God of, I'll just give you a little bit. He is a God that says, I will give you what you need and well beyond everything and anything that you could ever need. We see this most when Jesus is at the cross and he says, I'm not just going to hurt him, I'm going to kill him. His blood is going to run free, and that grace is going to be overwhelming and abundant in your life to cover everything that you have ever done. We serve a God of abundance, and it is incredibly picturesque here in the heart and in the life of Boaz. It is on full display. And I love what happens is as she leaves, it says this, then in verse 18 and 19, it says this, and she took it up and she went into the city. Now, I don't know how far away Boaz's field was from the city, but I would just imagine he's out in the country. They're staying in the city. He's got there ain't no cars. They're not driving anywhere. I mean, she picks up this hefty bag, 30 to 50 pounds, ain't light, right? So we learn a little bit about Ruth, like, all right, Ruth's okay. She can get after it a little bit. Like, she's a strong woman. She's good. And then this arm, all right, she's got 30 to 50 pounds of grain in a sack thrown over her shoulder. And then it says, she goes in and says this, and her mother-in-law saw what she had gleaned. And she also brought out and gave the food that she had left after being satisfied. She's got in this arm a bag full of grain, 30 to 50 pounds, and in this hand she's got a to-go box, macaroni grill, Olive Garden, whatever, right? And this is what she walks back into the city with, and this is what she goes and gives to Naomi. Now, here's what I think is interesting. Think about Naomi, what she has experienced during this entire day that's gone on. Naomi's been at home. Her daughter-in-law, her one last living relative, is left early in the morning. And she goes out and she says, I'm going to go find it. So she's gone and she leaves. And we don't know. And Naomi is sitting at home. There's no cell phone. There's no way of getting in touch. She's no idea where she's landed. She's sitting back. We know that at the end of chapter 1, she's bitter. She's struggling. She says that I was here full. Now the Lord has left me. And I've come back and I'm empty, right? She's in a place of sorrow and despair. Hopelessness, I would say, is probably very evident in her life. And what happens is this, is that as she comes, as Ruth has come back, she has no idea what Ruth has been doing. Is she alive? She's a foreigner. She's a Moabite. Has she entered into harm's way? Is somebody taking advantage of her? Is somebody, seeing her as vulnerable and said, oh, I'm going to take advantage of this one. What field does she wander in? Like, all these questions are probably running through Naomi's mind. And then what she hears is the door jiggle, or she sees off down the road, and she sees she sees Ruth making her way home, and she walks in, right? Can you just imagine what she's like? Oh my, where have you been? Where in the world did you get all this? What happened? And here's what we essentially see her words, Naomi in verse 20. At the end of verse 18, right? It says this, the mother-in-law, verse 19, where did you glean today? And where have you worked? Blessed be the man who took notice of you. So she told her mother-in-law with whom she had worked and said, the man's name with whom I worked today is Boaz, right? So I love this. I love the way that Ruth gives the name Boaz. You ever watch a TV series that is character-based and, maybe the theme is building, or you read a book, right? If you're a book reader, and it's like there's some character that you don't know their name and you don't really know who they are, but it's been built up that this is who they are. And at the end of like an episode or the end of a chapter, it's like they're about to reveal who the name is, and they're explaining it. Maybe you're watching it on like a screen and you're seeing, and it's like, oh, they show like part of their figure and then the shadow, and you're like, oh, they're about to show us. And you look at the time, you're like, oh man, there's only like 3 minutes left. Are they going to get to it? Are they ever going to show? And then right as like they pan up and they're about to show their face, it like cuts and it's like to be continued. You're like, come on, dude, show me the face. I want to see who it is. This is, I think, kind of the way that Ruth reveals who she's been with. Naomi comes and says, like, where have you been? Whose field have you been in? And she says it like this. Just think about like how dramatic this is. The man's name with whom I worked today is dun, 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 Boaz. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, no way, right? Because here's what Naomi would have realized. She would have known Boaz. She would have known that he was from the clan of Elimelech. She would have known, right? I mean, it says in verse 1, she understands, she knows that there's a relative there and she would have known every implication that would have come with it being Boaz. In this scene, if people are watching this, this is like the most dramatic TV movie moment that you could have. It is this huge buildup and this reveal of this information. And then in verse 20, Naomi says to Ruth, she says this, may he be blessed by the Lord whose kindness has not forsaken the living or the dead. And Naomi also said to her, the man is a close relative of ours. one of our redeemers. We're going to get to that really quickly. And Ruth, the Moabite, said, besides, he said to me, you shall keep close to my young men until they have finished all of my harvest. Now, I got to the redeeming part earlier, right? Who has the rights? Somebody from the clan. In this moment, Naomi reveals that he is somebody, right? He can be the guy. He can be the one that's available for us. You shall keep close to my young men. That's what he says. Ruth says, and what he tells me is that I'm allowed to come back to his field. I'm allowed to harvest every single day for the rest of the harvest season. So at the beginning of the chapter, we had two major needs, right? Food and family. Food is covered. Check. That need has been met. It's been met because we just walked in with a month's worth of grain. It's also been met because we've been invited back every single day for the remainder of the harvest season that she's allowed to go in there and glean and come back with grain. Now, I'm not saying that she came back with 30 to 50 pounds every day, but she definitely left and was able to come back with more grain because this is what she's invited into. And the harvest season, this is the beginning of the harvest season when she goes. Harvest season would have lasted anywhere from 3 to 4 months. She has enough means and food to basically provide for her and for Naomi for the rest of the year. It's an incredible picture. So that one, that need, check. Family, pretty good first date. We might be getting somewhere. We'll see. All right. So the chapter closes with this. Naomi said to Ruth, her daughter-in-law, it is good, my daughter, that you go out with his young women, lest in another field you be assaulted. So she kept close to the young women of Boaz, gleaning until the end of the barley and the wheat harvests, and she lived with her mother-in-law. So what we find is that Naomi comes to Ruth, confirms, hey, these are things, this is where you need to go, right? There's a man who's of great kindness. He's a man who is a redeemer. Stay close to him, stay close to his women. It's a place where you're going to be safe. It's a place you're going to be cared for. It's a place you're going to be provided for. And then after all this drama in chapter 2, here's the dud of an ending we get. She lived with her mother-in-law. You're like, dude, what? Are you kidding me? All this drama and build-up, and that's how we're going to end? She lives with her mother-in-law? All right, which is this. It's an invitation to come back, because if you want the juicy details in chapter 3, that's the juicy stuff. You're going to want to be here for chapter 3 next week, all right? We're going to hear all of it. Now, let me just lay out for us really quick, right? We've entitled this series, The Gospel According to Ruth, but today what I want to do is shift, and I want to show us the gospel according to Boaz. Because what I believe is in the heart and in the care of Boaz, we see a picture of the heart and the care of God. Here are 3 truths and challenges I want to lay out for us, right? Here it is. One is this. The gospel according to Boaz is this. This is who Boaz is. He protects the vulnerable. Ruth is a vulnerable woman. She wanders into his field as a foreigner, as a woman who has nothing, easily able to be taken advantage of. And rather than finding a man who wants to take advantage of her, she finds a man who wants to protect her and wants to guard her and wants to keep her. This is a picture of our God. This is who our God is that if you are vulnerable today, you do not serve a God who wants to take advantage of you, who wants to use you. He wants to care for you wherever it is that you find yourself today. It is a deep picture of the heart of God. The second thing we see is this, is that he provides for the hungry. He provides for the hungry. The invitation was, hey, come and sit at my table, right? When he invites her, I mean, this is breaking all the cultural norms, right? This is breaking all of them. What he looks at and he says is, hey, come, as the Lord of the harvest, the master of the ceremony, I am inviting you to come and not just to eat a little bit, but to come and be completely satisfied by these things. He provides for the hungry. And lastly is this, he pours out his grace upon the needy. This incredible moment. And we see that grace in so many ways in our life, but we see it poured out and displayed upon the needy. So for us today, the challenge is, what do we do with this? The truth is this, is that day when Ruth got up, she woke up in the morning and she left Naomi and she began to wander. The truth is she could have wandered into a million fields. There are fields all over the countryside that she could have gone to. There were places all down the road that she could have landed. But of all the places that she could have landed, she landed here in the field of Boaz. And she was invited to not just come in and just have a little bit of the field. She was invited to come and to stay in the field and to harvest in the field. Because in that field, the things that she found were things that she was looking for. She's looking for somewhere that she can go to glean. She's looking for some way that she can have protection. She's looking for refreshment. She experiences all of these things in Boaz's field. And I would say it like this for us today, is that many of us find ourselves in situations much like Ruth's, or we have been there, where we are dealing with sorrow, we are dealing with struggle, we are experiencing pain, and we are looking for all these different types of fields to satisfy, to give us some kind of experience, some kind of thing that's going to satisfy and it's going to help shift and change the circumstances we have. And what I would offer this is that as you're wandering and you're looking, and there's fields of pride, and there's fields of status, and there's fields of money, there's fields of success, and there's all these fields that you can wander into, there is a God who loves you deeply, who says, come to my field. Because in my field, in this field, what you're going to find is you're going to find these things. You're going to find community and companionship with people that will take care of you and protect you. You're going to ultimately find safety, not safety physically, but safety to be free of all the things that you've wandered in here with. Safety from, I have to put on, or I have to dress up, or all this stuff. You're free to run and to glean and to be in this field. And lastly is that you will find refreshment for your soul in a way that no other field can offer to you today. The invitation is that wherever you are today, whatever you're walking through, whether you're walking with Jesus for a long time or whether you have never in your life made a commitment, there is an invitation for you today to come and to get and to walk into Jesus' field, and not just to come into it one time, but to come. And as Boaz offers to Ruth, he says, come and stay here and don't go to any other field. And I believe that God is inviting us to come and to be in his field and to stay in his field and not to go to any other place, because here is where we find community. It is where we find protection, safety, and ultimately it is where your soul will be refreshed beyond what you could ever possibly imagine. So come and stay in his field. Father, we love you, and we're so grateful for what you have done. We're so grateful for who you are. We're so grateful for the way in which you care and love us, Lord, and we're so grateful that you have invited us. That all the needs we have in our life, all the things that we're walking through, all the circumstances, God, that there is an invitation to come, Lord, to find community, to find protection, Lord, to find refreshment. That all these things that we are seeking for in life, they're available in your presence.